It lays the predicate and the foundation for the development of a weather satellite that will permit man to determine the world's cloud layer and ultimately to control the weather, and he who controls the weather will control the world.
Welcome to the Bad News Broadcast, where the weekly bad news breaking reports just keep getting worse. And this week's update is no exception. Perhaps the most dire reports yet, and that's saying a lot. Let's get started. More in the coming empty food shelves, the crossroad where denial no longer works. From Reuters.com, from Black Sea to U.S. Midwest, extreme weather threatens crop output. Translation, crop collapse, and it's already happening in countless locations around the world. See any empty food shelves lately? Because you will. Wait and see. That is, unless the criminally insane start pushing the nuclear bomb buttons first, which they may. New from the UK Guardian, economists suggest storing grain to prepare for next global emergency. Clarification, this isn't just another bump in the road. It's the end of what has been. From ABC News, Norway starts stockpiling grain, citing the pandemic, war, and climate change. No mention of climate engineering in that report. No surprise. From the UK Independent, why orange juice is more expensive now and may stay that way. For the record, the cost of a glass of OJ is the least of our worries. How much longer will there even be any at all? And no, stocking up on those shiny metals won't save you, won't save any of us. Far sooner than almost any dare to imagine, the true commodities will be what you can eat, drink, and shelter with. Take the time to view the classic movie Soylent Green. You'll get the idea. There's more. From PBS NewsHour, depletion of major groundwater source threatens Great Plains farming. No, is crushing farming, and in countless other groundwater-dependent regions, the same. Depleting and increasingly contaminated. And there's that problem with the Colorado River flows and reservoirs. 40 million Americans will soon enough be impacted by that equation. From the National Herald, India, global food crisis, the specter of starvation deaths. They then ask, can anything be done at this stage to mitigate the crisis, to possibly limit the starvation and the possibility of starvation deaths? Question mark. Their words, not mine. Let's stop there. All of this is what the documentary film titled The Grab is about. Here's an excerpt from the producer's link to this documentary. Quote, quietly and seemingly out of sight, governments, private investors, and mercenaries are working to seize food and water resources. Question, does this come as any surprise? Because it shouldn't. Power and control over the masses is what criminally insane rulers of the masses have always sought. The majority of populations, as the rulers know all too well, can be kept constantly distracted if entertained with bread and circus. The current election theater of the absurd is a stunning example. Or they, the controllers, can mire populations in misery with wave after wave of environmental warfare, easily subduing them without firing a shot. And the controllers can just blame nature for the weather cataclysms, as they continue to do. For the record, though there is no shortage of completely demented disaster capitalists, all of their agendas, all of their objectives will be moot on a broken, devastated, and dying planet. On that note, from theatlantic.com, we ruined the rain. That's the headline. They say water's a cosmic gift. Climate change is turning it into a weapon. Let's stop there. Is climate change contaminating our rain? Or is it countless forms of anthropogenic atmospheric pollution with climate engineering at the top of the list? Every breath we take is contaminated. And about Earth's collapsing climate system, though there are obviously and inarguably countless causes contributing, climate engineering operations are at the top of that list. Only nuclear Armageddon could exceed it, which is also likely coming. And this reminder, post-collapse, 442 nuclear power plants will go into full meltdown mode without maintenance personnel, which isn't going to happen. And again, about the climate, there can be no legitimate discussion of it from any perspective without first and foremost addressing and acknowledging global geoengineering operations. That's how we build bridges. Focus on that problem first. If we can expose and stop it, we can fight about the rest. But all of us should agree that being treated like a lab rat with a global climate intervention Manhattan Project that's killing everything is not in our best interests. Moving on, toxic rain from Medium.com. Study, life expectancy in the U.S. has declined for 2 consecutive years, a trend not seen in over half a century. That may sound bad, but what's coming, indeed what's already unfolding, is unimaginably worse. Many factors are, of course, contributing to this equation, some of which we're not allowed to talk about. But let's focus on the skies, which we can't hide from. What's happening there we cannot hide from. From Wired.com, air so polluted it can kill, and it isn't being taken seriously enough. Let's stop there. About that headline, consider this. About the lack of disclosure regarding our toxic air. Is it really an oversight or an accident or all part of the plan? You decide. If you think those in power care about you and your posterity, think again. On a rapidly dying planet, all of us are a rapidly increasing liability to them, the money printers, those who control it all, for the moment. On that note, more bad news on what's coming down in our rain and thus is now on our water and food from phys.org. This is an ongoing and worsening story. New study confirms forever chemicals are absorbed through human skin. The report says new research published in Environment International proves for the first time that a wide range of PFAS forever chemicals, which don't break down in nature, can permeate the skin barrier and reach the body's bloodstream. The report continues. PFAS are already known to enter the body through other routes, for example, being breathed in, look up, or ingested via food or drinking water. If it's in the air, it's in everything else. And they are known to cause adverse health effects. How could they not? Through the skin, and could be a significant additional source of exposure to these harmful chemicals. No, not could be a new source of exposure, is, has been, and will continue to be, getting worse with each passing day. Let's add this parallel headline from ScienceAlert.com. Forever chemicals seep through human skin. Alarming study confirms. They say PFAS, forever chemicals, are surprisingly capable of passing through our skin. Now let's rewind to this 2022 headline. Let's put all these puzzle pieces together. I reported this on this broadcast when the headline happened. From stormwaterreport.com, scientists contend PFAS, forever chemicals in rainfall, represent global crisis. You think? When every drop of rain on the planet is contaminated? Obviously, a crisis. In summary, again, that's all rain, everywhere, from the North Pole to the South Pole and everywhere in between. PFAS, forever chemicals in our rain. How many different PFAS chemicals are there? 15,000, more or less, and counting. Which ones are in the rain? Who can say? Without extensive testing, which no so-called public protection agency will ever do, their job is to hide threats from populations, not to disclose them. Remember that. And how much worse are these chemicals when they're combined, so-called synergistic toxicity, not just with other PFAS forever chemicals, but also with other toxic nanoparticles that precipitation tests have proven to be falling in our rain: aluminum, barium, strontium, manganese, surfactants, polymer fibers, graphene, the list goes on and on. The report continues. According to new research, rainfall virtually everywhere on Earth contains levels of PFAS chemicals, stated that exceed safety limits set by the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. That's the new part in this statement. The report then states, because of the ubiquity of PFAS contamination in rainfall, soil, and surface water, and the inability to reverse this contamination on a global scale with existing technology, the researchers argue that conservationists should regard PFAS contamination as a 10th planetary boundary. Let's stop there. Translation: crossing planetary boundaries means we're on the road to self-annihilation, and there's no going back. And this is only one of the many boundaries that the human race has long since crashed through without a clue. For the record, there are no, quote, safe limits for anything that's toxic. If it's bad, it's bad. Also, for the record, the long list of atmospheric particulates just named that are showing up in our rain are all named in various climate engineering patents. Imagine that. And no, it's not just jet exhaust, as climate engineering disinformation disseminators would like you to believe. Believe your own eyes, your own sense of reason, and your own investigations. This is Dane Wigington. You're listening to the weekly installment of the commercial-free, non-political Global Alert News Report, the End of the World as We Know It broadcast, brought to you by Geoengineeringwatch.org, the largest and most visited website in the world on the subject of global climate intervention operations, aka weather warfare. We're at, I think, 47 million visitors to the site and counting. The dimming 15 million plus visitors or views in spite of draconian social media censorship. Please help us to increase that. Time is rapidly running out. Reaching a critical mass of awareness is the only way forward in this fight. We must reach a critical mass, and we can do that by starting a conversation on climate engineering that leads people to a credible source of data. Geoengineeringwatch.org will continue all of our efforts to be the go-to source on covert climate engineering operations. A conversation on climate engineering can easily be started with Geoengineering Watch awareness-raising materials available on our homepage. If we can fully expose weather warfare, so many other truths will be forced to the full light of day with it. Start a conversation, start a spot fire of awareness, ask others to do the same. If we can force this issue to light, we cause a shockwave all over the world. Wait and see. Moving on, and please listen to this next series of headlines carefully. They're important, all issued this week. It is a harbinger of the elephant in the sky, aka climate engineering weather warfare, being very difficult to hide any longer. New from commondreams.org. False climate solution of geoengineering could cause heat waves thousands of miles away. They say we need more regional geoengineering modeling studies to characterize unintended side effects before they have a chance to play out in the real world. That's a statement from the study's lead author, who then states, there is no solar geoengineering governance right now. That is scary, end quote, from the report. For the record, the study authors' concerns are more than 75 years too late. We, each of us, all of us, and even our parents and grandparents have been subjected to an ever-growing, expanding, malignant cancer of climate engineering operations, derailing weather and contaminating every drink of water, every bite of food, every breath we take. Ponder that for a bit. Next from the UK Guardian, a parallel report. Climate engineering off U.S. coast could increase heat waves in Europe, study finds. The butterfly effect, right? How hard is that to figure out? Can't disrupt any part of the system without disrupting the entire system. As Geoengineeringwatch.org has stated on the record, for the entire length of our 15 years in existence, that climate engineering is and has been causing short-term, highly toxic surface cooldowns, in many cases with chemical ice nucleation operations, which are the cause of the massive hail that's everywhere now, and the 75 mile an hour hurricane force winds that are part of atmospheric pressure zone manipulations that are used to augment the endothermic reacting ability of these chemical elements to surface flash cool regions where they are followed by record temperatures again on either side of those flash cooldowns. But all of this, again, disrupting the entire global system, and now that's beginning to be admitted to. Finally, it's only taken over 75 years. The report then says scientists call for regulation. Really? Again, a bit late for that, isn't it? And the headline that states that it could cause heat waves elsewhere, there's no could, there's no may, there's no might, is the right term. And what isn't mentioned in this headline, climate engineering elsewhere in the world, of course, would trigger the same augmenting of heat here in the U.S. Throw in some ionosphere heater-induced high-pressure heat domes used by the weather makers for jet stream manipulation and storm steering, and it all gets bad fast, as it is. And yes, burning 100 million barrels of hydrocarbon every single day and 26 million tons of coal every single day is obviously further fueling the planetary meltdown. But the international climate intervention operations are preventing the planet from being able to respond to all other endless forms of human damage. Not a good equation from any perspective. Welcome to the world of weather warfare and planetary plunder. Continuing with the Guardian report, a geoengineering technique designed to reduce high temperatures in the U.S. could inadvertently intensify heat waves in Europe. It's according to a study that models the unintended consequences of regional tinkering with a changing climate. The paper shows that targeted interventions to lower temperature in one area for one reason might bring temporary benefits to some populations. That's a stretch. But this has to be set against potentially negative side effects, they say, in other parts of the world, and shifting degrees of effectiveness over time. In other words, it diminishes over time. And let's backtrack. The start of climate engineering at the end of World War II, and at least statistically, and those statistics may have been falsified, a leveling off of temperatures until the mid-70s, at which time all the negative effects begin to kick in and the temperatures begin to rise. And what do the climate engineers do? Double down. That's why we have in the mid-70s the statement from some of the climate science community that they didn't know why it was not continuing to warm. And this is used as fodder by all those who claim there is no warming, which is patently false. Climate engineering was not known at that time or not acknowledged. And as it began to fail, they just double down. And they've been doing the same ever since. That's all the military-industrial complex knows how to do. When something isn't working or is doing massive destruction, double down. You're just not doing enough. And let's not forget the, quote, temporary benefits mentioned here are also toxic. Ozone destroying, rain cycle disrupting, the list goes on and on. And for the record, there's absolutely nothing benevolent about climate engineering disruption operations. Nothing. Final bit from The Guardian. The authors of the study said the findings were, quote, scary because the world has few or no regulations in place to prevent regional applications of the technique, referring to solar radiation management, stratospheric aerosol injection. They finished with reiterating this statement. There is really no solar geoengineering governance right now. And again, the report says that's scary. And they're correct. No regulations or monitoring by design, not an accident. A few more example headlines just to make a point. The elephant in the sky again, and its catastrophic consequences becoming all but impossible to deny. From newscientist.com, cloud geoengineering could push heat waves from U.S. to Europe. They say climate models suggest that a possible scheme to cool the U.S. by making clouds brighter could work under current conditions. And anybody who knows what an aerosol clouds look like, they're very dirty, dingy, pollution-looking like clouds. It's so incredibly easy to determine a naturally formed cloud from a toxic aerosol filth mess in the sky. Why can't more people do that? Why can't they see the difference? The New Scientist report then states there may be severe unintended consequences in a future climate engineering scenario. For the record, the quote, future of a climate engineered planet started immediately after World War II, the planetary experiment from which there is no return. From commondreams.org, false climate solution of geoengineering could cause heat waves thousands of miles away. Again, so many sources covered this. They say we need more regional geoengineering modeling studies like this to work and characterize these unintended side effects before they have a chance to play out in the real world. Statement again from the study's lead author. Let's just pretend that the raging climate engineering operations in our skies are only a proposal. Don't believe your lying eyes. Final headline on this theme from Futuro Prossimo, geoengineering madness. It can move heat waves from the USA to Europe. The report then states, bolt from the blue, or maybe we should say heat waves from modified clouds. Again, their words, not mine. What seemed like an ingenious trick to cool the US could turn into a climate nightmare for Europe. Cloud geoengineering, they say, the latest frontier in the fight against global warming, hides a dark side that we're only now beginning to understand. And this only begins to scratch the surface. Everything they spray in the skies settles to the surface where we all get to breathe it, gets absorbed into everything, our food, our water. Is it any wonder everything on planet Earth is now contaminated? Everything. It's not just industrialized pollution. Look up. On that note, the note of the dark side, new from phys.org, how shifting cloud patterns are exacerbating climate change. Imagine that, making it different. Where have I heard that before? Short-term, highly toxic surface cooldowns at the cost of a worsened overall warming. The report says, according to the researchers, clouds are changing as a result of climate change. Is that the best our experts can do? We have film footage of these aircraft spraying dispersions on and off, nozzles visible, X patterns, ovals, where there's no commercial air traffic, transponders turned off, and the quote experts pretend it isn't happening. Let's ignore the shockingly visible jet dispersions, toxic nanoparticles that are constantly filling our skies with filth and altering entire skylines. Nothing to see here. Just climate change changing clouds, they say. Really. Climate engineering particle dispersions are also trapping heat. Keep that in mind. From CNN, this update, more than 1,300 people died. This is an updated report in Hajj, which is the pilgrimage in Saudi Arabia, and many of them after walking in the scorching heat. And that's the official report. Unofficially, likely many more than that. From CNN, different location, deaths mount as Pakistan swelters in heat wave. The rising numbers of dead came as temperatures in Karachi soared above 40 C. That's about 104 Fahrenheit. When you add humidity and get a heat index, it's about 125, something in that range or more. Report then says doctors in the city, Karachi, say they've never seen anything like it before, but they will, and the rest of us with them. It's coming. From IFL Science, what is a wet bulb temperature? Experts issue warnings as heat wave grips U.S. For how many years have I tried to sound the alarm about wet bulb temperatures that are intolerable to the human body and their threat to all of us? And VPD, vapor pressure deficit, which I've also covered for a decade and a half, the factor that is contributing to the forest die-off and crop collapse. Altered atmospheric chemistry and humidity, the stomata, the respiratory ports on flora, crops to forests, shut. They don't breathe, they don't absorb carbon, they don't release oxygen. The forest doesn't smell like a forest anymore, hasn't for years, because there's no respiration going on. Trees are dying a slow, protracted death. UV radiation frying their foliage, toxic rain killing soil microbiome, killing root systems. That's why there's so many tree falls now. Every time the wind blows, trees uproot and fall over because their root balls are dying back, just like their crowns are dying back. On the subject of slow kill as a consequence of countless forms of human activity and resulting environmental devastation, human activities that include shockingly obvious climate engineering operations, why have some made it their mission to lie about these operations, to deny them? What motivates them? The "it's just jet exhaust" criminally false narrative. The same sources often push the quote global cooling and we're entering an ice age mind-numbingly absurd narratives. If you ignore your eyesight, your sense of deductive reasoning, and any form of honest objective research, you might believe those that are trying to convince you that it's all just accidental jet exhaust, making grid patterns, X's, blotting out the skies with filthy white, lingering, spreading nanoparticle dispersions. Ask yourself again, what's motivating those that are so committed to trying to convince you that there's nothing to see in our skies? That even though the entire so-called climate science community is trying to convince the world that we need to have jets spray particles into the skies to block the sun, even though governments around the world are pushing for the exact same so-called proposal, even though every single consequence of climate engineering that we're told will happen if geoengineering was deployed is happening in real time and has been happening. Filthy white skies, dimming the sun, massive hail, freak windstorms, flash freak freezes, flash droughts, flash floods, off-the-scale firestorms, ozone layer depletion, the list goes on. There's no commercial routes over my off-grid wilderness home in Northern California, yet during spray days, the jets are everywhere. East, west, north, south, C-17 Globemaster tankers can routinely be seen spewing a massive swath into the sky as they head directly north over our airspace. Again, no commercial routes here. And when they return hours later, usually late afternoon, flying south, nothing, zero, no trail whatsoever. I can easily hear them and then spot them in my otherwise silent location. Dispersions being turned on and off as well. Again, on other days, when nothing is scheduled to be dispersed in our skies, there is no aircraft. Can't hear anything all day. No commercial corridors over us. Connect the dots. Decimating the ozone layer, chemically nucleated extreme hail from almost every single storm of any significance now. Grid pattern skies, every imaginable form of weather manipulation is patented. Hundreds of them going back over 100 years. Extremely well documented historical records of climate modification, film footage of jets dispersing at altitude. At the beginning of one of my Geoengineering Watch live presentations, I showed film footage of patented aerosol dispersion mechanisms on a formation of 5 biplanes. This is 1923, over 100 years ago, and people claim that's not what we're seeing now? We live in an asylum. It's mind-numbing how few are willing to face and acknowledge the truth, let alone to attempt to do anything to make it better. That needs to change, or we have zero chance. None. Again, weather or climate modification of any kind is, always has been, and always will be destructive overall. And it's ultimately, in one form or another, about power and control. Moving on, chemically cooling polar regions at the cost of killing the planet and all life in it. New from CNN, IFL Science, and other sources. Scientists identify new Antarctic ice sheet tipping point, warning future sea level rise may be underestimated. Everything is far worse than anything we've been told. I've stated that for the entire 15 years of our existence. It's not as bad as we're being told, it's far worse. And now they're having to admit it because they can't hide it anymore. From this report, the Antarctic ice sheet is melting in a new way, a worrying way that the scientific models used to project future sea level rise have not taken into account, suggesting current projections are significantly underestimating the problem. New research has uncovered a worrying way that large ice sheets can melt through warm seawater lapping against the underside of ground-based ice. Is that hard to figure out? Did it take a team of experts so long to figure that out? The researchers believe the discovery might even be a new climate tipping point. How could it not be? If you have warm water underneath ice, is it not going to melt the ice? And they think it could be a new tipping point, a critical threshold that when crossed leads to runaway changes and totally upends an element in our system, a very big element. When the sea-based ice goes away, the land-based ice, which actually raises sea levels, starts to slide into the sea very rapidly, starting to occur already. How hot will it get? How many are willing to abandon wishful ideology in order to honestly answer that question or attempt to? From Arctic News, consider this report, the threat of global warming causing near-term human extinction. Please listen to this and please abandon ideology for those who have convinced themselves that because Al Gore's a criminal, and yes he is, and the environmental groups are criminal, yes they are, but that doesn't change reality on the ground. Because they're making money off catastrophe doesn't mean that catastrophe isn't real. We have the same entities making money off of global conflict. Does that mean the conflict didn't happen and people didn't die because someone made money off of it? No. Same is true with the collapsing climate. The report continues with this subheading, the potential for huge abrupt temperature rise. How much temperature rise, they ask? Question mark. Temperatures typically moved up and down by roughly 10 degrees C, the report states, and that's about 18 degrees Fahrenheit, between a glacial and interglacial phase of the ice ages, suggesting that a 100 part per million rise of carbon dioxide and a 300 part per billion rise of methane go hand in hand with the 10 degree C temperature rise. In other words, the report says, it looks like high levels of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere have already locked us in for a future temperature rise of 10 degrees C. Again, that's about 17 or 18 degrees Fahrenheit. If we continue in this course and that happens, game over. And about the warming calculations of this report, they don't even consider the planetary meltdown effects of the ongoing weather warfare operations, which again make the entire equation even worse. Here's a subheading from the report. How fast could temperatures rise? Question mark. How fast could a rise eventuate? There's a number of reasons why, despite the high levels of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, a huge temperature rise has until now unfolded only slowly. It's not that slowly. The temperatures are being underreported. They say carbon dioxide emissions, which reached their greatest warming impact 10 years after the release. In other words, the full wrath of the carbon dioxide emitted over the past decade is yet to come. A rapid temperature rise is held off by the temporary masking effect, this is deception, of aerosols emitted when burning fuel, especially sulfur dioxide from coal-fired power plants. Once this masking effect falls away, a huge temperature rise will be expected. Let's stop there. That last point is a covert method of pushing climate engineering aerosol dispersions with zero mention of the downstream consequences which grossly outweigh any notion of a climate engineering benefit. And after over 75 years of steadily ramped up climate engineering operations, how's it going so far as planetary omnicide looms on the near-term horizon? And this report is a stunning example of how you must sift the baby from the bathwater. There is truth and lie in any official anything. You must learn enough about the equation to realize what they can't hide anymore and are thus disclosing and what deception they're blending into the report. This Arctic report continues. A rapid temperature rise is further held off by the fact that some feedbacks can take time to kick in. There is a huge but decreasing capacity of oceans, ice sheets, and glaciers to act as a buffer for heat. It's not decreasing, it's collapsing. And the same is true with forests. Again, if you know enough about the entire situation, you can decipher what is accurate in a report like this and what not. Forest, again, not absorbing carbon anymore, not to any significant degree. They become overall carbon sources, not sinks. They're not releasing oxygen as they should. Global oxygen content also declining rapidly. The entire atmospheric chemistry has been completely thrown off the rails. More from the report. Demise of the ice and snow cover in the Arctic and methane releases from the seabed of the Arctic Ocean can take time to eventuate, and much sunlight is still reflected back into space. That can change quickly as the polar ice caps disintegrate. And they are. I'm going to stop there in this article because it's convoluted. I want to get to the point. In regard to the polar regions, please don't believe me. Please take the time to watch a film called Chasing Ice. You can find it online. I believe it's a $1 or $2 charge to watch it, worth every penny. And you can see with your own eyes what's happening in the ice deposit regions of the world, the cryosphere. And if you don't believe your own eyes, there's nothing I can tell you. And this is an accelerating process, a feedback loop. And the feedback loops begin to feed on themselves. One domino knocks down a bigger domino and still a bigger domino. That's how it works, and that's how it is working. We are in an incredibly non-linear equation. And when the polar researchers estimate a near-term 10 degrees C temperature rise scenario, they're talking about before the end of this decade. That's how close we are to a planet that won't support life. And those who say, well, this has happened before in Earth's past, never at anywhere near this speed has this happened, which makes it exponentially worse. And that's what so many don't understand. And stand back and look at this whole equation. Who could possibly think this is in any way, shape, or form sustainable? That's what's so mind-numbing for me. From the time I was very young, I've shared this too many times in the broadcast, but I remember the landfill I went to. It wasn't a landfill, it was a mountain, a Matterhorn of trash. This is in Ontario, California. And I couldn't believe that this was happening. And I couldn't believe anybody could think it was sustainable. And I've never believed that. Or being stuck in traffic in LA in 6-lane wide freeways, 6 lanes each direction, stuck for hours. And they're trying to build more freeways for more cars. And how can that possibly continue? Or the, quote, EV vehicles, what a farce those are, with child third world laborers destroying their environment, trying to dig up the minerals necessary for that. And people buy those cars thinking they're doing a favor for the planet or anybody on it. Total delusion. We are hurtling toward near-term impact. And yes, when you burn this much formerly stored carbon and you put it back in the atmosphere, that will trap more heat, just like climate engineering particulates trap heat, all of it. It's an all of the above equation, not a this or that. That must be remembered and considered always. And if you want to see the methane blowouts, again, please search Siberian methane craters. Consider that's happening on the seafloor, 10 times bigger. That methane is all going into the atmosphere. And yes, that is absolutely a problem. So at the end of this large report on how dire our climate situation is from the Arctic scientists, the Arctic News source, what do they say? They say this: the situation is dire, and the precautionary principle calls for a rapid, comprehensive, and effective action to reduce the damage and improve the situation. And their suggestion from these so-called climate scientists: deploy climate engineering. You can't make this up. It's a category of insanity all its own. Total insanity in so many arenas of, quote, academia that can't seem to see the forest from the trees, or at least admit to it, so to speak. And speaking of trees, yeah, they're all dying. All dying. Sorry to diverge here, but I live in a forest that is dying by the day. Every single fir tree in Western North American forest is in some stage of decline or death. Other species following close behind, dying in mass. And the fir trees, they're done. It's a matter of time before they're all done. And as soon as these forests ignite, and the climate engineers certainly likely have plans for that, if you want to know why would they facilitate the incineration of forests? Source of ignition, again, separate subject. Search wildfires serve geoengineering agenda. One of our most important reports. Please search that and watch it, and you won't like what you learn. And this week, while suffering through an episode of Weather Channel climate engineering cover-up source, one of their main cover-up actors, Jim Cantori, was featured on a generator ad where he said, quote, "Power outages are the most important thing you can prepare for." Really, Jim? How about preparing for a planet that will soon no longer support life? How about admitting to the climate engineering weather warfare factor, Jim, that's pushing all of us over the edge, along with the entire web of life, contaminating every breath we take? Perhaps Jim Cantori and the rest of the Weather Channel climate engineering cover-up clowns should be sent a link to the dimming and invited to view it. You decide. You're listening to the weekly installment of Global Alert News, the Bad News Broadcast, installment number 464, June 29th, 2024. This is Dane Wigington, your host. Global Alert News is brought to you by Geoengineeringwatch.org, the largest and most visited website in the world on the subject of climate intervention operations known as geoengineering. I never wanted this job. Never. I couldn't look the other way. I've never been able to look the other way, so here I am and here I will stay. But I live for the day when the insanity in our skies is finally fully exposed. And that's not the end of our problems by any stretch. But once we expose it, the fur will fly. Wait and see. I live for that day. Recordings of the commercial-free, non-political Global Alert News Hour can be found on the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org under the recent column and on the Dane Wigington YouTube channel. Geoengineering Watch wishes to express our deepest gratitude to those that have helped us to expand our reach and thus our voice in this desperate last-hour effort to sound the alarm. If you're on our email list, please put us on your email contact book so that our mailouts don't go to the spam files. Please help us to share the groundbreaking documentary The Dimming, which fully exposes the climate engineering atrocities. Now again with over 15 million views on YouTube in spite of brutal censorship. Thanks to all of you for that. The best way to share is by circulating the direct link to The Dimming by email directly from the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org. Sharing directly helps us to overcome social media censorship. When viewing our YouTube of The Dimming or Global Alert News or any other Geoengineering Watch video on YouTube, please subscribe, share, and comment, all of which helps us to circulate critically important data to a much wider audience. About reaching those that still aren't looking up, here's one way. Start a conversation with Geoengineering Watch awareness-raising materials which can be found on our homepage. Our only goal, to provide activists what they need to move this fight forward, are very high-quality printed materials, shocking images, color images, heavy paper. These images are worth 1,000 words, as the proverb goes. And if this doesn't wake someone up in your circle, they're not going to wake up. Move on. We have Geoengineering Watch hoodies to go with our new shirts, photos of both on our homepage. We have scannable business cards and bumper stickers, all effective tools to help strike up a conversation on the climate engineering issue. Again, reaching a critical mass of awareness on this atmospheric onslaught is the great imperative of our time. If we can expose it, we have a chance of stopping it from the inside out. If you're willing to share a picture of yourself with a Geoengineering Watch t-shirt or hoodie in some crowded location, ideally, please send your photo to us so that we can post it as part of our activist compilation, which is now part of our materials page. The images encourage others to make their voices heard in this all-important battle to sound the alarm. As always, to those who are steadfastly committed to this must-win fight, no matter what circumstance you're in, what situation, that you're doing your best, and I want to express my deepest and most profound gratitude to all of you. It's our collective efforts that can still make a difference at this late hour. All of us are spokes in this wheel, all of us necessary to make it roll. Moving on, more of oops, it's way worse than we thought. From phys.org, CO2 puts heavier stamp on temperature than previously thought, analysts suggest. And keep in mind, it's not just the particles they're spraying in the sky as part of geoengineering solar radiation management operations, but can you imagine how much fuel these aircraft are burning every single day? And this connects to everything else. Global conflict zones where the same core of control that does what they do in our skies is also orchestrating the conflict zones because they need the resources to keep all these operations moving, to keep their stranglehold on control. And so how much CO2 are all these aircraft putting in the skies? How much CO2 is Al Gore's private aircraft putting in the air and all the other so-called climate-concerned executives? They don't care. They're here for profit, period. Same with Al Gore, same with the environmental groups, but that doesn't mean that this isn't a factor. You can't take all this material, put it into the sky, completely alter atmospheric chemistry, and not have a problem. Then add climate engineering, which again prevents the planet from responding. Forests aren't absorbing carbon as they should or would have. Oceans the same, because plankton's dying, because geoengineering and the particles and the radio frequency transmissions combined have all but destroyed the ozone layer. Now we have incredibly intense UV radiation frying the plankton that were the single biggest uptake of CO2 on the planet. And they are frying now, collapsing. According to peer-reviewed study Atlantic plankton populations down 90%. No plankton, no people. So many roads lead straight back to climate engineering. The downstream consequences are so vast, they're impossible to quantify. From climate.gov, during a year of extremes, carbon dioxide levels surge faster than ever. Of course, feedback loops. One domino knocks down a bigger domino and still a bigger domino. So as we have all this changing of atmospheric chemistry, and you have climate engineers drying out forests so they can incinerate those forests and as a form of climate engineering. We have peer-reviewed study to prove that. Peer-reviewed study advocating for the intentional incineration of northern latitude forests as a form of geoengineering, to put enough atmospheric particulate matter into the air to mimic the short-term toxic cooling effects of a volcano. How insane is that? To incinerate the Earth's last remaining life support systems again, and this adds into this massive carbon surge scenario that's not acknowledged here, but how insane is it to destroy Earth's last remaining life support systems to temporarily and toxically cool a few regions for a few months? Remember the Canadian fires last year? After they started, again, source of ignition, separate subject, but that smoke was pushed right down over the U.S. Northeast and then forced down to the ground with an atmospheric high-pressure dome, which pushes the air down, holding it there so everybody breathes it. Back to the toxic air equation I started at the beginning of this broadcast, and it cooled temperatures. But at what cost? At what cost? And there's multiple benefits for those in power, because a population that's sucking up this toxic particle matter, and we know they're spraying on top of these smoke canopies as well. Why are they doing that? That's not hard to answer. It's certainly not out of benevolence. It's completely malevolent, and we captured this happening over the Paradise Fire. Blanket aerosol spraying directly on top of the smoke canopy, whatever that's about. It's not climate engineering. So, bottom line, multiple benefits for those in power. A population that's getting steadily sicker and dumber and more debilitated, much easier to control. And you can skew the temperature data with this big, massive toxic cloud canopy so it doesn't look like it's as warm as it actually is. But that scenario comes back to bite, and hard, and it's starting to happen now. And please forgive me for being a bit all over the board, but there's so much data to cover that I want to at least touch on it so that those listening can then follow up on it later in more depth and detail. We are facing a very near-term impact, and I'm trying to rattle as many cages as I can while I can. So about the firestorms from USA Today, this: wildfires rage across 3 states as evacuations, searches continue. Firestorms are raging in locations around the world, for that matter, and have been. Much worse is coming. Count on it. Climate engineering and firestorms, again, inseparable. Source of ignition, another subject, as I've stated many times. Separate those two equations. What matters most in this equation is what is establishing the conditions for the firestorms to burn with such ferocity. Again, search the Engineering Wildfires section on the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org to learn what most don't want to know, and Wildfires Serve Geoengineering Agenda. On that note, this week from the New York Times, extreme wildfires have doubled in 2 decades. More than doubled, far more than doubled if you look at especially acreage incinerated. They say in a changing climate, extreme wildfire events are becoming far more common and more intense according to a new analysis. So many factors in that equation. It's not just drying out the forest with desiccant particles by cutting off precipitation as well, but these particles are incendiaries. They're an incendiary dust settling over foliage everywhere. Again, why are they spraying this on top of the smoke canopies that can only make the fires worse? Why are they doing that? Watch the Dimming documentary, and you can view that yourself in that documentary. From the UK Guardian, there's 20% more methane than they thought. New data confirms Australia has been undercounting cattle. It's those darn cows behind everything, isn't it? The nefarious cattle. And though cutting down forests to raise cows is bad, very bad, formerly frozen methane deposits on tundra and seabeds is the exponentially more dire problem that almost none are mentioning. There's enough stored methane deposits to turn our planet into Venus. If all of this formerly sequestered gas makes it into the atmosphere, game over, done. Search Geoengineering Watch Venus Syndrome to learn more. From the Washington Post, ending growth won't save the planet. They say curtailing economic growth won't save the planet from catastrophic climate change. It's climate collapse. And how many times have I said that on this broadcast? We're through the guardrail. You can put the brakes on all you want. We're going to the bottom of the canyon. And from day one at Geoengineering Watch, I've also stated this: there will come a time when the severity of what's unfolding can no longer be hidden. Thus, they will start to admit to it. And they're starting to. You don't have at the end of all these articles, just buy a solar panel and a Prius and we'll all live happily ever after, because that's not going to happen. Mexico's water crisis continues to worsen, and simply trying to survive will soon be the bottom line in this city of 22 million people. And far too many still believe that they're immune to such a scenario, or worse. Such a conclusion is a grave mistake. It's coming. From phys.org, Panama Canal Agency warns water shortage is, quote, not over. No, it's not. Also from phys.org, climate crisis sees rise in illegal water markets in the Middle East. Illegal water markets. And most of these aquifers are polluted as well. So many in the U.S. polluted because of fracking. And what do we hear? Drill, baby, drill. Frack, frack, frack. Who cares if we have nothing to drink, no water to grow food, all of it's toxic? As long as we can drive that Winnebago motorhome around, everything will be great, right? Not so much. From MSN.com, scientists are preparing for major weather transition this summer that could bring drought and floods to the U.S. Could bring? Where's the could? It's been ongoing and worsening for how long? And how do they know this? Because they're reading the scheduled weather script. How do I know that? Because Raytheon and Lockheed Martin do all the weather modeling for the National Weather Service and NOAA. Why do the nation's weathermen need private defense contractors to do the weather modeling for them? Because they're doing the weather scheduling, and they need the script to match. Though often it doesn't. Many are late to get the script, and that's why you have such varying weather reports all over. And this statement I've heard a lot of late. It's just summer, so it's hot. Or look at the beautiful sunset. How many are so in denial that they pretend that everything that's happening is just normal? It's just normal. When you hear that from someone, you know you're dealing with someone who doesn't want to know the truth, let alone to deal with it. They don't want to know. There's a great shortage of courage in the ranks of the human race. That should be obvious by now. New from CNN and other sources. When will the heat end? Question mark. Never. That's their statements, and it's true. This will be the coolest summer for the rest of your life and mine, however long or short that may be. Forecasters for the coming weeks and months show exceptional heat is largely here to stay, with only fleeting periods of respite. What are those fleeting periods of respite? When there's enough moisture for them to chemically nucleate, baseball-size hail, 75-mile-an-hour surface winds, and that's your fleeting respite. They say in the sobering summer reality on a planet warming due to carbon fuel pollution, the heat isn't going anywhere, they say. It's only going to get more frequent and intense. No mention of climate engineering. All of these reports, criminal in their denial of climate engineering. From Semaphore.com, world breaks 1,400 temperature records in a week as heat waves sweep globe. Where's that coming ice age that so many sources and sites have so touted for so long, while Geoengineering Watch has absolutely held the line? Because we base our conclusions on data, not ideology. Planetary meltdown being further fueled by climate engineering. And even with all these records, that doesn't take into account the temporary toxic chemically nucleated surface cooldowns that skews the data, or there would have been 2,800 records, or who knows how many. Bottom line, those in power are using every tool at their disposal to try to keep the population from panicking until the last possible moment. From climatecouncil.org, have we already gone past 1.5 degrees of warming? Question mark? No, we haven't. We're likely past 3.5 C now. If you don't believe this, wait in the coming weeks and months, you'll begin to. A reminder of this recently published book title, The Heat Will Kill You First, Life and Death on a Scorched Planet. In the book, the author criticizes the use of the term global warming because it fails to convey the urgency associated with the climate collapse. The author decreed the term global warming as a sounding gentle and soothing term, as if the most notable impact of burning carbon fuels will be better beach weather. Yeah, a little worse than that, isn't it? You can go to the beach in Florida where the water temperatures are 102 and there's toxic seaweed, dead fish everywhere. Doesn't sound like a great scenario, does it? And governments are further destroying the weather with covert climate intervention operations, and that's what the global climate conferences are about. The COP conferences are about forcing countries to actively or passively participate in the climate engineering insanity while they keep business as usual until there's absolutely nothing left. From Yale360.edu, Yale University, could the global boom in greenhouses help cool the planet? Question mark. What a moronic statement that is. So we can just turn the planet into Mars, but then we can save it by building greenhouses. And this is, quote, academia. From ABC Australia, Australian bushfires could be more intense and extensive than current predictions, aka it's worse than we thought. Again, from the denverpost.com, the West is warming and drying so fast that a crucial drought monitoring tool can't keep up, aka it's worse than we predicted. At the edge of apocalypse, from counterpunch.org, biblical scale flooding, scorching heat, collapsing grid systems, animals, crumbling waters, rising crops, wilting economy on the brink, and millions displaced. Well, then that sums it up, at least the beginning. What's coming is going to be far worse than that, actually. From Axios.com, July's fiery U.S. temperature outlook makes June look tame. They know because they're reading a script. It's going to get worse. From PVMagazine.com, spontaneous glass breakage on solar panels on the rise. Why? Because the UV radiation is so intense, the panels are superheating and it's breaking the glass. It's not just a manufacturing problem with the glass. Touch anything. If you can't feel how hot those surfaces are, you're not paying attention. Interiors of cars superheating as well. That's intense UV radiation. Single biggest causal factor in the ozone layer destruction equation is climate engineering, atmospheric sprayed particulates, and frequency transmissions to manipulate those particulates. From AccuWeather, Eastern heat wave, West cool conditions to trade places before the end of June. Let's translate that. Climate engineered weather whiplash, going to get worse and worse. I'm almost out of time. Let's cut to the core of delusion that's pumped out by the Matrix media weapons of mass deception. From CNN, the fertility crisis is here and it will permanently alter the economy. I'll get to the point in a moment, but the CNN report states falling fertility rates have long been a concern for economists worried that aging societies could diminish the labor force, further exacerbate inflation, upend consumer culture upon which mature economies depend, and overwhelm government programs meant to care for the aging populations. They continue, declining birth rates will permanently alter the demographic makeup of the world's largest economies over the next decade. CNN then states, if forecasts hold up, 2064 will be the first year in modern history where the global death rate surpasses the birth rate. 2064? Really? For those that don't yet understand the equation or are unwilling to face it, based on all current trajectories of global ecological collapse, if we remain on the current course, it is highly unlikely anyone will be here at the end of the decade. This decade, again, not opinion, a mathematically certain destination short of a complete course correction. This CNN report is a stunning example of the mind-numbing blindness and programming that permeates societies all over the world, that somehow we, the human race, are magically going to survive on a completely contaminated, no longer functional, dead planet. And the so-called economic experts are concerned that there won't be enough workers and consumers to keep the loot, plunder, pillage, and pollute nightmare of industrialized, militarized, so-called civilization going and further expanding, and that, they say, could be bad for the economy, as if that will matter once we have turned our formerly thriving planet into a lifeless ball of rock spinning through the hostile expanse of space. The CNN report of total delusion finishes with this. By 2100, only 6 countries are expected to have enough birth rate to keep their populations stable. Africa's Chad, Niger, and Somalia, the Pacific islands of Samoa and Tonga, and Tajikistan, according to research published by The Lancet, a medical journal. Well, there you have it, a medical journal that we're all told is among the most credible in the world that is clearly completely clueless in regard to the planet's already collapsing and failing life support systems, much of it in the countries they just named. And the Lancet Medical Journal pretends that those countries will be cruising right along at the end of this century? No dramas? Really? How many, when their final hours arrive, will look back and ponder how they could possibly have been so blind, how they could not have clearly seen it coming? The planet is broken. Nature is broken. Human so-called civilization in its past and current form is short-term self-annihilation, nothing less. So what now? As I've stated previously on this broadcast, when doubt and despair feel overwhelming, when hopelessness seems to take over, which is exactly what the power structure has programmed into us all from birth, remember at your core, never forget ever, that even the lowest whisper of a human voice can be heard over the echoing rumble of armies when that voice dares to speak truth to power. The key to what we face is consciousness, a correct philosophy, aka rules for life and faith. We must stay present and focused no matter what. In the words of Eckhart Tolle, if you can't be present, even in normal circumstances, such as when you're alone in a room, walking in the woods, or listening to someone, then you certainly won't be able to stay conscious when something goes wrong, or when you're faced with difficult people or situations, with loss or the threat of loss. You'll be taken over by a reaction, which ultimately is always some form of fear that pulls you into deep unconsciousness. Such challenges are your tests. Only the way in which you deal with them will show you and others where you are in regard to your state of consciousness, not how long you can sit with your eyes closed or what visions you may see. In the words of the Hopi elders, we are the ones we have been waiting for. It's up to us. Impact at full velocity is far nearer than almost any are yet willing to believe. How often I am told, quote, it can't be this bad because it just can't be. Question, does such a statement seem a sound basis for a conclusion? I think not. What we have, all we have, is now, and we must make that count. Check the activist suggestions link on the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org for specific instructions on how you can move this fight forward. Every single day matters at this late hour. Please make your voice heard, make every day count. Until next week, this is Dane Wigington with geoengineeringwatch.org.